Now, in what appears to be a power struggle between the ANC and the DA in Gauteng, with an ANC Youth League representative asserting that the DA is trying to prepare for a silent coup in Gauteng, and Helen Zille, the Thatcher of Africa, according to Neil de Beer, bullheaded, saying that the ANC would not bully the DA in Gauteng, it appears that the DA would leave the GPU arrangement between the ANC and the DA in Gauteng for the ANC to lead alone. Let's listen to this whole problem as explained by Helen Zille, and I'll be back for some really interesting analysis on deeper reasons why the ANC actually has shut the DA out of leadership in Gauteng.
What's going on is that the ANC does not want to honour the statement of intent that we signed on the 14th of June after that all-night negotiation. And they want to continue in Gauteng as if they won the election and can dictate the terms to everybody else. As it happens, they only got a few percentage points more than the DA in Gauteng. We were very close on their heels. And ironically, if opposition voters hadn't spread their vote out amongst all kinds of tiny parties, we would have been the biggest party in Gauteng, which would have changed the field entirely. But be that as it may, people get the government outcomes that they voted for. And the ANC got 34%. That is not a majority, and it's not for them to dictate the terms. My sense is that the ANC has not yet understood that they did not win that election, and that they have to bring us in on a power-sharing basis that reflects the outcome of the election. That is what it says in the statement of intent that we signed. The three principles under Clause 16, proportionality, inclusivity, and the outcome of the election. And yesterday in negotiations, it emerged that the ANC had all along had no intention of bringing in other parties besides the DA. And they wanted to bring in the DA as a kind of prop or crutch to keep them in power, but not to have any meaningful share in power. So the ANC, in a cabinet of 10 people, plus the Premier, they wanted to take 8. That's 10 plus 1, 11, plus the Premier. They wanted to take 8 and give us 3. Now, for a party that is almost the same size as them, that was clearly absurd. And because it was quite evident to us that they didn't understand the sufficient consensus clause, we were really going to be captives or hostages to the ANC in Gauteng, in the government there, and that, of course, would have been fatal to the DA. We are not going to go into government with the ANC to be hostages or props to the ANC. We are going in there, as the voters intended, to meaningfully share power. And the ANC had no intention of honouring the voters' outcome, and we were not prepared on their terms to go in. They still say, well, we offered you this, and we say, look, this is ours to organise and to conclude in negotiations together. You're not the offering party. It's not due to your generosity that we're going to be there at all. It is a consequence of the will of the voters.
Brilliant. What do you guys think? It's really, I was listening to a speech today by Moeletsi Mbeki, a political analyst in South Africa, and I thought it was really interesting what he said. He spoke about how, there's a lot of baggage in South Africa, and when whites and blacks, coloreds, everyone would have to learn to let go of their baggage, for the country to move forward. And I think this is what's going on right now in Gauteng between the ANC and the DA. It's clearly a power struggle, but at the same time, Moeletsi Mbeki argues that the DA is correct in its position, in that the whole agreement with proportionality and government GNU initial agreements haven't been really followed as well, although it's been followed almost perfectly at the national level, but at the provincial level there's still lots of bitterness around it. Like Mbeki argues, there's lots of emotions also within that whole agreement, and so that's actually really clearly playing out. in Gauteng at the moment, where the ANC and the DA are not just able to cooperate. And I actually found an article on Daily Maverick today actually arguing that, the ANC has actually kicked the DA out, and that the ANC, I think, will be governing the Gauteng alone. So it's on the Daily Maverick, it actually argues that, Premier Panyaza Lesufi, Lesufi is actually, the name that really comes to mind a lot when you hear the premiership of Gauteng. Lesufi has actually appointed a minority cabinet in Gauteng, which is actually going to function without the DA. What's the reason for that? That's really not according to the initial agreements, in the GNU. I don't know if probably there are new agreements in the GPU, or is this just the ANC really playing what many of you have seen in your comments, its game? But let's really understand what's really going on. So it argues that, parties, including the Gauteng Premier, Panyaza Lesufi's new cabinet, they only account now for only 33 of the legislature's 80 seats, which actually was set up after talks between the ANC and the DA deadlocked. Okay, so it goes on to say that following weeks of uncertainty and negotiations to form a government of provincial unity, Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi has actually finally appointed the members of his executive, and it's dominated really by the ANC, all right? And it will be in charge of 7 crucial portfolios, while the IFP and the PA and Rise and Zanzi will be allocated 1 each, all right? So the ANC now, the ANC would be in charge of 7 crucial portfolios, right? While the IFP, PA, and Rise and Zanzi would actually be given 1 position each. So it argues that this means that in the Gauteng 80-seat provincial legislature, the political parties in government actually hold only 33 seats, right? Which is far from an outright majority. Okay, now it says that Gauteng's 7th administration cabinet excludes the DA, which holds 22 seats in the legislature. The EFF actually holds 11 seats, and the Mkonto Wesi's MK party holds 8 seats. Action SA holds 3 seats. Freedom Front Plus has 2 seats. Build One South Africa by Bosa, that's by Musima Mane, and actually the African Christian Democratic Party actually have 1 seat each, right? While the ANC has 28 seats, all right? So it actually goes on to argue that, that despite initially supporting Letsufi's unopposed election for another term as premier, and the ANC's Morakanye Mosupuyo for the Speaker of the Gauteng provincial legislature, the DA has since said that it will be in the opposition benches. So in return for endorsing Letsufi and Mosupuyo, the ANC actually supported the DA's Refilo Nsheke as deputy speaker, right? And on Wednesday evening, last week Wednesday, it says that the DA Gauteng's leader Solim Simanga actually said, following prolonged engagements involving senior members of both parties, that no agreement has been reached between the ANC and the DA with all this arrangement. Now, this is Solly speaking. Solly argues that he said that we found ourselves unable to accept a counter to our offer, and the offer made to the DA was and continues to be one we find both unfair and unreasonable, right? So that's Solly now from the DA party in Simanga is actually arguing that, the offer that was offered by the ANC in Gauteng was actually really, irritable to, not really acceptable and unreasonable according to Solly, to the DA. And so they've really decided to step back. But let's understand further. It argues that according to the DA, the ANC offered it just 3 portfolios and wanted to keep 7 to itself, which the DA said it was not reflective of the will of the voters. Now, it says Solly Nsimangwa actually continues now in his explanation, saying that, we will not be functionaries whose rubber stamp decisions made by an executive, right, that eventually is intent on keeping us on the edge of the fray. Beyond the problematic nature of an attitude that seemingly does not understand what their significant loss of the vote share in Gauteng entails, an air of refusal to be partners, which ultimately is the goal, dominated conversation. So this is according to Solly Simangwa. Is actually arguing that, during these concessions, it appears that the ANC really hasn't really realized that it has lost at 17% of its initial vote, especially generally, but also even in Gauteng, that the massive loss the ANC actually has lost from its voters, it isn't really sinking in. The ANC still believes that it still has the dominant power and it still has the dominant control in Gauteng. And this is what the political analyst in Beck is actually arguing for, that, the whole sensitivity regarding the historical injustice and the history of South Africa seems to really still find a really heavy place on both parties, with the ANC really being sensitive when it attempts to hear or feel the use of certain narratives or languages as a re-entrenchment of a historical position, for especially black people, and also the whites, in the use of, especially like in the DA, for example, in the use of certain language, with all honesty, is actually received in a very negative light by the ANC. And so this is actually causing a lot of problems, a lot of massive problems now in Gauteng. We're really not able to get some stability in Gauteng. It actually argues also that early on Wednesday, the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula confirmed that the talks he said that talks had deadlocked even after the intervention of the party's national office bearers, and that before that engagement, the DA had agreed to take 3 MEC positions, as well as 6 chairpersons of portfolio committees, but they now later backtracked and demanded that positions should be shared on a proportional basis. And we hear from this video, Helen Zille speaks about the problem of proportionality and how this problem of proportionality isn't really being played in the provinces as agreed in the initial GNU agreement, you see. So Mbalula is actually arguing here that he says that we were unable to accede to the DA's demands, and they are not the only party we are negotiating with, says Mbalula. So the trickle-down effect now that's really happening in Gauteng, I really hope it doesn't take place at the national level, where the DA actually seems to have excluded itself from the provincial leadership in Gauteng. We don't really know how it will play up in the national level, but it's really interesting that Mbalula is actually arguing that, they were unable to accede to the DA's demands, I think, in Gauteng here, but that there are other parties that are being negotiated with. So I've seen a lot of your comments in my last video. Many of you have actually said that the DA should have actually stepped out, and that the ANC is like a zebra, like Neil De Beer usually speaks about. He says that you might paint the zebra different color, but it will always come out black and white. So anyway, it says that Mbalula's remarks actually came hours after the DA federal leader Helen Zille addressed the media on the impasse and lamented the ANC's failure to allocate portfolios proportionally and its lack of transparency during the process. It also argues that this is now Zille speaking. Zille is actually saying that till now, the ANC has been prepared to offer the DA a maximum of 3 out of 10 cabinet seats without telling us how many seats they intend to take for themselves and how many they propose to offer to other parties. This approach was not conducive to building an atmosphere of trust. We wanted clarity on these issues. The ANC today conceded that they had intended to allocate 3 seats to the DA and 7 to themselves out of a cabinet of 11, including the ANC premier. This division falls far short of the requirements set out in Clause 16 of the Declaration of Intent, given that the DA comprises of 45% and the ANC 55% of the government of the GP, government of provincial unity, right? So this is according to Helen Zille. So she's breaking it down, the problem from what she sees. But anyway, there's this political analyst, actually Dr. Nsikelolo, Nsikelolo, actually, is actually saying that, Mbalula actually made a very interesting statement saying that the ANC has always held a view that provincial state structures of the ANC are at liberty, or they have a leeway to negotiate with potential coalition partners on their own terms, all right? So, in other words, when you read this carefully, it appears that, at the national level, there might be some kind of like officialdom, so to speak, right? But at the provincial level, the ANC has actually given the provinces the power to actually work on their own terms. And probably this is what is really playing out now in Gauteng, where the DA actually expected what should have played at the national level to play at the provincial level, but that's not the case, because the Gauteng leadership, actually, the Gauteng's ANC leadership actually, has this notion that, now at this level of the provincial level, things are actually done on our terms. So the professor goes on to say that, most of us were under the impression that the statement of intent is a framework to work with and that it is binding. Now, why would the DA and ANC vote for the IFP to get the premiership post, and be accommodated in KZN if the same logic is not going to apply to other provinces which were hung? Now, another political analyst also says, Sanusha Naidu is actually saying that ANC members in Gauteng appeared to have different interpretations of some of the clauses in the statement of intent and were seemingly divided, while the DA appeared to have the same interpretation and spoke in a unified manner. Now, it also argues that, another big problem is the failure to create an independent body to enforce these provisions and to provide the correct interpretation. The ANC has the winter takes all mentality as opposed to viewing these coalition agreements based on a win-win situation, says this political analyst. Now, he also goes on to argue that Zille said her party would not allow the disagreements in Gauteng to affect the national and KZN arrangements, as it was serious about governance. So anyway, this is where Gauteng actually is now at the moment, where it appears that the ANC seems to be might actually end up ruling alone. And I like what one of the political analysts in this article actually argues, that there has to be a body, right, that enforces most of the agreement that have been signed in the Government of National Unity Agreement, a statement of intent, and tries to really that body has to try to follow up in the provinces to ensure that the agreement that have been signed at the national level should be foreseen in the signing at the provincial levels, and not have this same notion where at the provinces the ANC has its leeway and does things according to its terms, when the DA party, I suspect when you listen to Helen Zille, when you listen to Scribe at the new Home Office, I'll be making a video on him, you see that these guys are actually guys who follow principles, who want to follow principles and rules of law. But when it comes to these debates, I suspect that there's a lot of struggle in the provinces with the ANC, with the AFF, the MK. Actually, they're all at loggerheads at the moment, and so this is actually a class. So I really think that it would be really, really important that there's a different body that actually, supervises the transition of the agreement, especially the understanding of the clauses and the statement of intent that has been signed by these parties at the national level, to see that how it trickles down and plays effectively in it, exactly how it has been signed at the provincial level. So, but these are just my thoughts anyway. I don't know, what do you guys think about this? What do you guys think about Helen Zille's speech here? Share your thoughts in the comments.